Well, welcome back, folks. I thought I would demonstrate or show you how I seal the petcock opening on a fuel tank as I'm preparing to use electrolysis to strip the rust from the inside of the tank. Of course, this has to be sealed, and there's a number of ways you could go about it. This type of fitting here, or attachment method, is common to Hondas and Suzuki's. There's another attachment method that uses a spigot or a flange that's welded in place. It requires a little bit different approach. This style is common, again, on Suzuki's and Hondas in particular, at least in my experience. But nonetheless, we're going to figure out a way to seal that up. So I'm not going to go through the mechanics and literally demonstrate me putting it together, but rather I'm going to talk you through the techniques that I use. In order to seal this up, usually I'll start with making a plate, and that's what you see here. This happens to be just a steel plate. I pulled this out of my scrap box. I did not have to make any modifications to this outside of I smoothed it off with a file. I just touched it with a needle file here to make sure it was nice and smooth. But believe it or not, I didn't have to make any other modifications. I was already cut the size and had a hole in it. And as you can see there, it's virtually a perfect fit for where this has to go, right there. So that was very fortunate. Otherwise, I'd have to take a piece of steel or aluminum, cut it to size, drill a hole so I can thread it into that fitting right there. Here's some examples of other plates like this that I've made over the years. This one happens to be for I don't know if you can see that or not, a Suzuki GS650L. I don't think that comes through very good there. I worked on a GS650 a couple of years ago for a childhood friend of mine. He needed it to get it back on his feet. So 2 or 3 years ago he brought it over and I'd clean a fuel tank out. So I had to make this plate for that bike. And these others are just from a couple other bikes over the years. This is the Yamaha RD350. And this plate, which is aluminum, I'm not sure what it's for. It might have been my KZ650. I'm not sure, but I've got others here as well. Anyway, so this plate was really already cut to size. So what I did is I took a piece of inner tube rubber, that's what this is here, and I cut out a little gasket. You can see where I cut it out. I just used this plate as a template and marked around it and then cut it out with a scissors. And then I just took a hole punch, a cheap office type hole punch that I keep in my shop, and just punched that hole out to make a nice round hole. And you notice this is countersunk already. Not that I need that, because that's not going to be of use to me, that countersunk hole. But the way this will go together, and obviously this will fit something like that. And this little rubber gasket will go between the plate and the face of the tank. Now, to prepare the tank there, right there, I took a wire brush and a Dremel, you can see that, and cleaned that surface up because there's a little paint and there's a little corrosion. So I cleaned it up with the Dremel, and then I also hit that with a needle file just to make it nice and smooth and clean, because I need to seal this so that I don't have any leak when I put the electrolysis solution inside of the tank. That's what the purpose of this little rubber gasket is, right there, to act as the seal. I just took a common 6mm bolt right here, and I put a stud on it, and I'll use a little washer. And the way this will go together, as I'll demonstrate, I will put it like this. You can see, I think, how that fits together there. And then I will line everything up, thread that bolt down into that tapped hole in the tank, tighten it up, and I'll take my wrench and snug up this lock nut. And the reason I do it that way is I want this to protrude, this part of the bolt to protrude, so I have something for the clamp that I'll be using with my battery charger. The clamp from the battery charger will clamp onto that to complete the circuit for the electrolysis process, and I needed something to protrude. So that's why I'm going to use this nut to tighten this plate down against the surface of the tank, and I can grab a hold of that nut, or that stud sticking out with the clamp. Now, one other thing that I'm going to do is, get this out here a second, is I'm also going to apply a little sealer. In this case, I'm just going to use some Permatex high-tack gasket sealant between the rubber gasket and the surface of the tank. Now, is that absolutely necessary? Probably not, but I don't want to go through all of this and find out I have a leak of the solution when I fill it up. So I'm going to spread this, and this is a flexible sealant. There's a lot of different sealants you could use for this. You could use a silicone, which I tend not to use for something like this. Though silicone is an excellent sealant, it's also an adhesive and can be very tenacious and hard to get off, because I'm going to have to remove this eventually, of course. Seal All, which is a single part contact cement, which is also excellent for something like this. I don't have any Seal All right now. I was a little surprised. I went looking for it. I thought I had it in my inventory, and at least I can't find it. So I'm just going to use this super high-tack gasket seal, like you can see here. This is a little old, so it's getting a little bit on the firm side. So what I think I'm going to do is squeeze some of it out into a little glass container, a plastic container, and thin it a little bit with acetone, and then brush it on. I'll probably brush it on the gasket here, secure the gasket in place, then mount the plate like I just showed you, and then tighten this all in location. And then I will let that set for probably overnight before I then go ahead and fill the tank with the electrolysis solution. So that's the basic process I'm going to use here. And once that's sealed, then I can go ahead, flip the tank over, and I will first use probably grease lightning to get that old fuel out of there, and then we'll go ahead and fill it with the solution I use for electrolysis and begin the process of stripping the rust. I'm going to go ahead and put this together, and then we'll come back in a few minutes and I'll show you what it looks like when it's all done. Well, it's about 10 minutes later now, and I have the plate all mounted, the sealing plate. You can see where the Permatex gasket sealant oozed out a little bit. That's fine, that's not going to hurt anything. So I'll let this sit now, like I said, for probably overnight, and then tomorrow morning I'll test it, see if it leaks. I don't think it probably will. And then I'll get on with cleaning the inside of this fuel tank. A couple other things I wanted to mention. Number one, this super high-tack sealant, that's about the end of its life. I think I used it the last time I'm able to. This is probably, it's at least 10 years old, if not more. And I did thin it with a little bit with acetone to make it workable, but I'm going to have to toss that. I used a little Permatex thread sealant around the threads of the stud itself to make sure that I didn't get any weeping around the threads and up through. So that's not very old, so that's good and pliable. Also, I was thinking, when it comes to these plates, I didn't mention that you can make these plates out of anything you want. This one happens to be steel. These two are aluminum. I've even made them out of wood, like you can see here. This is probably 18, 20 years old now. That's the RD350. I've made them out of almost everything. In fact, I think I've even used thick plastic before. So you don't have to overthink the plate. I work with whatever I have. This plate was, as I pulled it on my scrap box, was ready-made for this purpose. Use whatever you have at hand. You don't have to overthink it. Just seal it up really good. Think it through in terms of how to attach it, and you'll be just fine. So we'll see this tank again somewhere later on, probably as I work through the electrolysis. I haven't really decided yet, but we'll pick this up a little bit later. I thought I would share with you today my basic setup for using electrolysis to derust the inside of a fuel tank. I think I've talked about this before at various times, different projects. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on electrolysis. There's all kinds of YouTube videos, there's information all over the internet on using electrolysis for rust removal, in addition to what I've shared. So this is not a tutorial or a how-to, but rather I thought I'd show the basic setup. Of course, I have over here the battery charger. That's just a standard off-the-shelf battery charger, which is what I always use for this process. I have the ground lead coming from the battery charger, coming and connected to the bolt that I had put in the drain outlet with that little plate that I had fabricated over here on the lower left side. Of course, I know you can't see that, but that's the ground or the earth coming from the charger. I have the charger set on a 12 volt 2 amp setting right here. That's not real critical in my experience where you set that at. That's usually where I place mine at. And then the positive coming from the charger right here, the red, is connected to the anode, which I will pull out here in a moment and show you what that looks like. The anode is supported by a plastic rattle can, spray can cap. I use that because it's a way to isolate the anode from the body of the tank. You do have to have that completely isolated. You can't ground. Well, you could. You're going to have a lot of sparks if you do it. If you ground the anode to the tank, you create a dead short. So that just acts as a way to insulate the anode. And there's other ways you could do it, but I just used cap off a spray can. This cord right here that you see connected, this is just an elastic bungee style cord that hooks around the anode, goes underneath the tank here, comes back around and connects over here. And that's just to keep this assembly, that is the plastic cap and the anode, in position. That's all that's for. So let's go ahead and we're going to pull this anode out. I'm going to show you what it looks like. It's been in here now for probably 2 hours, I would say. I only operate this when I'm in the shop during the day. I don't run it like overnight or I'm not here, just because I don't want to run a chance of something shifting here. If this was to move around and create a dead short and create a spark or the potential for a fire, that's why I only run this during the day. But this has been running a couple of hours since the last time I cleaned the anode. The first thing I'm going to do is just disconnect the positive, take the hook off, and now you'll see exactly what it looks like as I pull it out. You can see some of the crud wants to come off the anode right there. And there you get a look at what it looks like. This has been running, I've had this set up and running for probably 3 days now. And that's pretty typical. Let me get up here a little closer, you can see it, see what it looks like. That's pretty common. You'll note on the end of the anode, I just spun on a silicone, hollow silicone plug that I use for powder coating. And the reason I do that, or did that in this tank anyway, is when this fits in here, I didn't want the end of this anode to potentially ground against the tank down in here if I didn't get it just right. So that just acts as an insulator. So now what I will do is I will wire brush this off, and this is my wire brush right here. I will wire brush this clean and rinse it good, and then put it back in the tank and keep on going. And this can take anywhere from a couple of days to a couple of weeks, depending on how bad the fuel tank is. And in fact, I did a very large fuel tank for a local farmer probably 15 years ago. It was a very large tank off a international super M, I believe it was, if I recall correctly. 1950s tractor. I had to pull the tank off, and he wanted it derusted, so I had to set up a very elaborate process, and that took almost all winter. It took like 3 months to get all the rust out of that tank. It was a big, heavy steel tank. It was just full of rust. I had 3 anodes in that tank, by the way, but it did turn out okay. But anyway, we'll brush this clean, put it back in place, and keep on going. And eventually, after a period of days or a week or whatever, the tank will be bare steel. And then I'll rinse it good and decide what my next... Well, it's actually several weeks later from when I started the rust removal from this tank. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is it's now springtime here, and I'm spending more time outside working on other things, so the Honda project hasn't been getting as much attention as it had earlier this winter. And as I indicated, I think, in one of my previous segments, I only run the electrolysis when I'm in the shop, since I want to make sure that we don't have any problems when I'm not here. So it doesn't run 24 hours a day. It only runs the hours when I'm physically present in the shop, and since that's reduced now, it took a little longer than normally to get the rust out of this tank. Typically, on a tank like this, with the condition this was in, I would expect I would be able to derust it with electrolysis in probably 3 to 5 days, 4 or 5 days, somewhere in there. And again, it took me the better part of 2 weeks, maybe even more than 2 weeks. I didn't really keep track, but it's been a few anyway. Well, it's all done, and I thought I'd give you a shot of what it looks like inside. What you see there is flash rust. The tank, when you complete this process, is stripped down to raw steel, and it's very, very difficult to prevent flash rust. What I do is, when I complete the electrolysis, I drain the tank, I flush it with clean, hot water several times. I then rinse it with a 50-50 solution of greased lightning in water, hot water. Rinse it really well, then hit it again with clean water. Drain it completely, of course. Then I take a shop vac and put it on reverse. That is, it blows rather than vacuums. Pull the petcock seal off and put the hose from the shop vac exhaust in here, move it around, and let it just dry out the inside of the tank. Usually takes hour maybe. You can get it pretty dry, but it will still flash rust. Even if you dry it immediately, you will inevitably end up with, again, you can see it right there, that's just surface rust. And in fact, if I rub it with my finger, you can see I can kind of get it to rub right off. I think you can see maybe right there where I rubbed it with my finger. Now, if that bothers you, you can seal the tank. I don't, as a matter of course, automatically seal all my fuel tanks. I know some people do. They're more comfortable that way, and I only do it if I think it needs it. I usually will put in an inline fuel filter and to catch any debris that might remain. But in terms of sealing, only if I think the tank integrity has been compromised or I'm concerned for some reason will I go ahead and line the tank with a tank liner. Speaking of tank liners, this is my brand of choice. I've used probably pretty much all of them out there these days. This is made by POR or POR 15. It's a very good product. It's a one part. There's no mixing of two components together. It holds up very well to ethanol laced modern fuels, and I usually keep a can or two of it around. In fact, this can, you can probably tell by the fading of the label, has been around for a while, but it hasn't been opened. Once you open it, you have to use it. You can't save it, and you can hear it's still liquid in there. But if I was to seal this tank, this would be what I would use. Will I go ahead and seal the tank? Maybe. I haven't completely decided yet, but probably not. I'll probably just leave it the way it is. But again, knock yourself out. If you're more comfortable sealing the tank, then feel free to certainly do so on your projects. I thought I'd show the anode rod. that I pulled out of the tank. This is, well, let me get the gas tank out of the way. You can see what it looks like here when we're done with it. You can see how it's eroded, particularly right here where it passed through the filler neck of the fuel tank. That's very common, very typical. By way of comparison, this piece of all thread right here, this threaded rod, is the size, this is the size that this was when it started. And you can see that right there where it comes through the cap. This is the same rod. So you can see how much of it has eroded through the electrolysis process. And again, that's very common, and that's to be expected. And if you didn't see that, in fact, I would be probably concerned. So I think that's going to be it for this video. I just want to give you a little shot of what it looked like now that I'm done and it's been dried. This tank will just be set aside unless I decide to seal it. If I go ahead and use this fuel tank sealant, now would be the time to do it before I start to work on the outside and exterior to paint it, which would be a little bit later on yet before I can get to that, primarily because of the weather. But most likely I'm just going to set the tank aside right now. I will document all the stripes and all the layout of everything before I paint it. But I'm not sure you'll see this tank again until it's been repainted and probably installed on the bike. I don't know yet. We'll see how that goes. But that's going to be it for this video, folks. Any issues, questions, thoughts, drop me a note. Otherwise, as usual, thanks for watching.